Wasabi guys, welcome back to another Commander video. This time I would like to talk about 5 upgrades and 5 cards to cut from the Vampiric Bloodline Commander Precon deck. This is of course alongside the Innistrad Crimson Vow set. Now the whole theme around vampires this time around is of course the blood tokens. These are all artifacts that let you discard in order to draw a card, so you're also going to see the return of things in this deck like Madness. I'm going to be going over 5 cards that I think you should cut in order to make room for these 5 cards that you should add. And this is all being centered around the primary commander for each of these decks. Whenever I do an upgrade video, I'm using the best commander for that specific precon, one that probably won't require you to take out too much. So for this deck it is of course Strefon, Mara Progenitor. Before I get into the video, first I would like to remind you that most of you who are watching right now are not actually subscribed to the channel. And if you like the videos, you want to support the channel, please also consider becoming a member. First one to cut is Shadowgrange Archfiend. This is not a bad card, and when I say cut something, it's not necessarily because it's a bad card. This is in fact a really cool card, and I think you could take advantage of it in a good Madness deck. I don't think this is a good Madness precon though. I think when you're fooling around with blood tokens, you don't necessarily need to focus on the actual act of discarding. And unless you have an engine that can really benefit off of Madness like with Anje Falconwrath, I just don't really see Madness being that worth it. It does have a nice Madness cost that really lowers the total cost that you have to pay for it. And the ability's really cool. You force your opponents to sacrifice their biggest creatures and you gain some life, but this is not a vampire, and the only synergy is with the blood tokens, the fact that you discard with the blood tokens. Save this for another deck because I think this specific precon you're better off just going full vampires. It's something I'm going to be talking about with the Spirit deck. You're better off just leaning into that tribal synergy. And the number 5 card to add is Olivia Crimson Bride. We are kind of taking a step backwards with this precon deck. You are losing access to white and what is still probably the strongest vampire commander, Edgar Markov. Fortunately, we didn't get a ton of white support in this set. It's all red and black. So you should still see a ton of great cards that are being introduced that either fool around with blood tokens or just add new vampire synergies. Olivia Crimson Bride doesn't really add anything brand new, it's just a great way that you can bring creatures back from your graveyard. The benefit to playing vampire tribals, that chances are you have other legendary vampires, and if you're bringing back legendary vampires, you don't have to really worry about them being exiled. She's very aggressive, it's easy to get that ability off, makes it well worth the 6 mana. The 4th card to cut is Imposing Grandeur. I like this card, just not in this deck. It's kind of the same thing with Shadowgrange Archfiend. This is something I would rather have in something like Kineos and Tiro. You are offering that card draw, that discard, and then draw to all of your opponents as well. I think what would make this even better is if they didn't have the option to just say no. They were forced to discard and draw that many. That way you could abuse certain players who had pretty cheap commanders. And it would just be better for things like Nekasar the Mindraiser as well. With this deck, I just don't really see that being relevant outside of maybe triggering Madness, and the Madness cards are really only in here to supplement the blood token strategy. There's a lot better card draw in red, there's a lot cheaper card draw in red, but this is a nice card though. The number 4 card to add is Impact Tremors. I'm going to throw a little nod to something like Bantu's Monument because I think it serves a similar purpose. You could say Bantu's is even better because it does offer cost reduction, so you're paying cheaper mana one way or another, but the goal here is to make it so that many players lose life. Of course, this is all to synergize with Strefon. There are ways of doing this outside of an enchantment like Impact Tremors, but it just seems like you'd be taking away from the vampire tribe if you were just going with a lot of other random creatures that just happen to ping each opponent. So as far as just being a great inclusion, you're not really taking away from what the deck wants to be. You get to still go full vampire tribal, you're not including off-tribe creatures, and I just think that's really important, especially if you're playing a tribal deck. And the number 3 card to cut is Stromkirk Condemned. Nothing really special here. This is one of the vampires from, I believe, Eldritch Moon or Shadows over Innistrad that never really caught on because it's an ability that you might see in Limited, because that's really all you're going to get the advantage in. Other than that, you would assist Madness strategies, Madness vampires, but if you're just going to discard and you can only really activate this ability once per turn, you want more than just all your vampires get an Anthem. What I think would be better is if this card were 4 mana, but you could activate that ability several times. So not really that strong, and that's why I think it's a great card to cut. The number 3 card to add is Twilight Prophet. Very similar reason to why I recommend Impact Tremors and Bantu's Monument. Twilight Prophet is both on theme with the vampire tribe and what you want to do in order to get those blood tokens with Strefon. You provide yourself a little bit of card advantage. You do have to get that Ascend, which shouldn't be difficult if you are stacking up those blood tokens. It should be pretty quick to 10 permanents. Once you do, you're also draining life from your opponents, you're gaining a bunch of life. It is one of the more expensive cards here, but I think it's well worth it. I think vampires need some type of speed. They need a way to get through their deck, and if you're able to, it's actually a pretty quick tribe. Vampires don't tend to be super expensive, so you do need some kind of catalyst. And the number 2 card to cut is Avacyn's Judgment. This card is only really useful if you have a way to discard it, and you do with the blood tokens. I don't want to completely discount the strategy here with Madness, but it just doesn't really seem to make much sense where there's not really much of a payoff to Madness itself. Yeah, you have X damage divided if you're willing to first pay a mana to discard, and I just think Madness is a little bit too risky if your commander does not directly synergize. You do want to stock up on those blood tokens so you can actually use his ability. I think there's a lot of good removal that you can substitute in this card's place, and while I don't think those are the best inclusions, the absolute best cards to add, if you're looking for one to take out, definitely this is one of them. And then the number 2 card to add is of course Anje, Maid of Dishonor. There's nothing saying you couldn't choose Anje Falcon Wrath and just lean into the Madness strategy. I just don't think that's really interesting if Anje's not your commander first. So Maid of Dishonor, she really does synergize with any other strategy that benefits off of blood tokens. She gives you probably the easiest way of making them. If you're constantly able to generate those blood tokens by having vampires enter the battlefield, then with Strefon, it should pretty much mean every single turn you're getting another vampire into play. She also offers you a payoff for all those blood tokens. If you're able to sacrifice them, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So that's a pretty cool ability late game, but that also means that she's going to synergize directly with our commander, making it so that each opponent loses life and we get the blood tokens off of Strefon. And the number 1 card to cut from the Vampiric Bloodline's Precon deck is Urge to Feed. You could make the argument that Avacyn's Judgment is a good card if you want to lean into the Madness. Any kind of removal that is limited to -3/-3 is a huge red flag. It is only a 2 mana instant that's pretty standard for removal spells in black and red. However, the only thing it has going for it is the ability to tap vampires and put 1+1/+1 counter on each of them. While the deck doesn't really have many synergies with +1/+1 counters, you do have vampires that add +1/+1 counters, but that doesn't really add any kind of synergy to what our commander is. Ours is all about those blood tokens, sacrificing them to get some kind of value. Urge to Feed just seems like a vampire synergy for the sake of synergizing with vampires. Something like this can be easily replaced with a better card like Feed the Swarm. So the number 1 card to add, and this is probably one of the coolest cards that you can add to this deck, it's not just a straight up vampire synergy. I know Anje's really good for that, but Inspiring Statuary is the card to add to this Precon deck, especially if you are going to be focusing on blood tokens. There needs to be a way to benefit off of blood tokens. You need some kind of payoff, but you also need a way to make them work for you. You need some type of advantage during the game, and I think this is the best way to get that advantage. Since the majority of your deck in a tribal deck is going to be creatures, you just keep playing creatures that deal damage to each opponent. You keep getting those blood tokens until suddenly each creature you play is so much cheaper because you have a ton of these blood tokens that you get to tap to contribute, paying towards their mana cost. That's what I like about Precon commanders, is that you'll always find like some weird obscure card, and while Inspiring Statuary does have a home in a lot of commander decks, I don't think anyone considers it a staple. I think it really does have a home if you are going to be focusing on blood tokens. Definitely consider it. It could make a tribe that is more about speed in recent years even quicker. It's just all about taking what might not seem like anything great in those blood tokens and suddenly turning them into mana rocks. But anyway, let me know what you think about these 5 cards to add and the 5 cards to cut. Vampiric Bloodlines looks like maybe the better of the 2 decks, but then again, this tribe has had a lot more synergy and support than Spirits have had. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. I will see you all next time.